Hello people. So the generator manifestor. Following on from my two previous videos, the manifestor and the generator, and I've also realized some of the basic premise of how I look at this system is shown in this video here, which is currently the second one on my channel, called Love, Light and the Human Design. So generator manifestors, I think, absolutely tiny point here, but I think most of the human design calls it manifesting generators, and the reason I prefer the term generator manifestors was because I once heard Karen Curry say, well, the generator comes first, it's the generator manifestor. I don't know if she carried on using that or just forgot it, but it kind of strikes me as the more correct term. So I'm not really sure there's a great deal to say here actually, but as we've said with the generator types, they're always working. They have this very animalistic awareness, and with the manifestors they have this kind of message that they're working on, although a big part of the manifestor's psychology is the undefined sacral, which obviously the generator manifestor doesn't have. But okay, here are some celebrity types of people. Dr. Ramani, the woman that talks a lot about narcissistic abuse, she has about a video a day. Stefan Molyneux, who lives very much a life that I think can be modelled for other people, and which he does strive for, as he believes that his life is showing the value of his philosophy, and he's a philosopher. Andrew Huberman, who is a person who's very committed to bringing out the latest scientific insights for the population to actually use. Robert Greene, who wrote a few books. One of them was the 48 Laws of Power, I think it is. I think it's 48. And just a bunch of other names, mostly people that are kind of obscure actors actually. Jensen Ackles, Tom Hardy, Charles Bukowski, Carl Urban, Soren Kierkegaard, Paul Joseph Watson. The list goes on and on and on. And of course I've known them personally. I think having personal examples is obviously very important, because when you see someone who's an actor, that's obviously someone that has made it, or someone in the public eye, a philosopher. That's someone that has sorted out enough of their issues that they are performing at their best a lot of the time, so that they can be on stage, in the spotlight, have constant attention on them. But in my personal life, I have known generator manifestors that were unbelievably positive, just like some of these examples. And I've met generator manifestors that are some of the most confused and broken people that you're ever likely to meet. Now, they're not necessarily poor, they're not necessarily got obvious mental health issues, even though they might do. But these are passionately confused people, is the only way to really describe it, I think. And I tend to think that is the thing with the generator manifestor. They have a lot of energy, and that energy has to go somewhere. And for those that sort things out, they do very, very well. They seem very positive, productive people. But if those people don't sort it out, for whoever doesn't sort it out, the energy will tend to go in a very confused direction, and it will be a lot of energy, being a generator manifestor, and they will be a real wreck. We are spoilt for choice in our examples here, but let's go with Stefan Molyneux. What I know of Stefan Molyneux, I've listened to his podcast for a good long time. So he grew up in bad circumstances. We don't need to go into that. He started coding fairly young. He got really into computers, and it was all just starting when he was young, and he was like, oh, so this coding thing's great. He then, after I think some playing around in theatre and stuff. He went and became a chief something officer, not CEO, the chief technical officer, I think. But he was very, very high, and I don't know whether he founded companies, but he was almost at the top of it. And then it looks like he wasn't able to get employed at some point, and he just thought, nah, screw this, I'm not doing this anymore. And he went and did philosophy, where he came out with what I think are some pretty groundbreaking concepts. I think the future will remember his name. And he talks about virtue. The way to live a good life is through virtue. But it's not just words when he says it. There are no outs. There are no easy solves for Stefan. Like, you confront things, and he's pretty uncompromising on that. This is the pattern that I think the generator manifestor does go. So they start their lives as generators. They're surrounded by all of this world and all of this confusion. And whereas the manifestor only has the divine throat, they don't have a sacral to kind of involve them in society. So they have their message, and it's kind of stuck within them and kept away from the world. Whereas the generator manifestor, they have that throat center. They don't have an undefined sacral. They have a defined sacral. So they are both things. The sacral, I tend to think, is very much works off an evolutionary psychology kind of thought process. It always wants to have fun, is very kind of extroverted in a sense. It wants to have a girlfriend, a job, and status. And it's willing to work very hard for those things. But the throat center opposes that. It tends to be this kind of abstract, important thing that needs to be expressed, this reality that is just experienced. And I tend to think that a lot of generator manifestors, they kind of want to stay in that generator position with all of the pressures that the world brings on us to kind of convince us to be hedonistic and to stay within hedonism. And it takes a good deal of strength to break out of that sacral dominance and move into a place where they're willing to upset people, they're willing to use their manifestor throat. I think all of this stuff about following your dreams is probably strongest there for the generator manifestor. Stefan explained that he got to this point where he'd been studying philosophy for 10 to 15 years. He said before he really got into philosophy, he was a hedonist. He believed in pleasure. But he'd done all this philosophy studying, but he was making loads of compromises in his life and not doing any of the conclusions that he'd come to. And he just stopped sleeping for a couple of months. Now, I don't know how much sleep he practically got, but I assume that if it was relevant to him that he wasn't getting enough sleep, that he got very little sleep. And I can't remember how exactly he got to this. Perhaps it was through therapy, or perhaps it was through a dream or something like that. But eventually he realized that he couldn't live like this anymore, that he had to actually put into practice the things that he'd put together. I knew someone else who was a generator manifestor who just stopped sleeping when she was young. She was in her 20s somewhere, and she just stopped sleeping night after night after night. She couldn't sleep, and I wonder if there's some sort of correlation there, whether there was something going on that she wasn't able to confront. And she never did sleep properly again. She went over to medication, she went to see loads of doctors, none of them could help her, and she just kind of lived like that. And this was someone that was very passionately determined to stay within a kind of pure generator energy. Out of the generator manifestors that I have met and have known personally or closely, and whom I have been in conflict with. I said this in another video, there always seems to be this point where I'm talking to them and I've kind of ground them down. It isn't something I do deliberately, and it doesn't happen with the generators, like I said. Well, it happens a bit, but not a lot. But at a certain point, I'll be talking to someone and I'll say, look, you did this thing 5-6 times, what's going on? Like I kind of challenge people when I talk to them. I have a channel from my ego going into the throat, the 2145, and that does challenge people. And anyway, it gets to this point where I say XYZ to someone, maybe they come back with something, and then I say, what do you mean by this? And then they don't respond. This has happened with the person that I talked about previously who didn't sleep very well. This has happened with both male and female. This is a common thing that I've experienced with the generator manifestor, and I believe in each case it is with someone that is trying to be just a generator. They have made their compromises to fit in, and they are trying to keep to that. But the situation requires the throat. This is what the catalyst is bringing out. And I obviously have the defined throat. And like I've said a few times, I will say to them, what did you mean by this? Is there anything you're not telling me? And then they will say something, and then I'll be like, okay, but what about XYZ? And they just can't square all the circles, or they just can't do what needs to be done to express whatever it is they want to express, even if that's anger. Doesn't have to be a positive thing. Maybe I'm being annoying, but their sense of expression or the negotiation of conflict is just not happening. The person shuts down, and I usually will summarize, look, this isn't working, I've got a problem with this, and then the connection will end, and it will full stop, it will bang end, and I won't see the person for years, or maybe ever again. And there's something good about that. I know it doesn't sound good, but as I've said, when I'm dealing with the generators, there is a little bit of that dynamic. I said with one generator, he'd let me down like 20 times, and I kind of listed them. I said, what's going on with this? But with the generators, there's no real instant like that mostly. Even with the guy that had let me down a bunch of times, there wasn't really a reason. He was just not very considerate. And with other generators, even ones that have sent me mad messages and crazy stuff, there isn't really this thing that seems to need to be expressed by the other person. It's just a bunch of stuff that happens with generators, really. And a long-term pattern is not a good thing to keep going often, but there isn't usually this point where you can wind it back and say, well, this person said this, and that's quite a serious allegation. And then I asked them what they meant by this, and they didn't say anything, and that's just not on. This isn't what happens with generators. With generators, everything kind of, goes along, and eventually it doesn't work, and so you kind of move away from them or tell them to get lost. But as I keep saying, with the generator manifestor, that throat wants to say something. The creator, so to speak, provides the opportunity for the expression to be made. The generator manifestor refuses, and then we end it there. I did one of my 5-second breaks there, but I'd got that wrong. I did it up to 2 minutes rather than 4. But the point being is, if something like this is annoying me, if each of these people have said something unpleasant or whatever, and they were meant to say something and they didn't, well, that shows a kind of karma to the world, doesn't it? It shows that the world is kind of keeping track, in a sense, that lack of a throat connection isn't just something that's annoying to me, that it's being remembered and noticed by their chart and all that kind of stuff. I don't know how that is eventually going to end. I don't know how society is going to work with its generator manifestors to get them to say what they actually feel. But as I also said, when a generator manifestor is working well, they're a complete breath of fresh air. They will engage and work hard in the areas that they work, and they will generally have a lot of expertise, and they're just a breath of fresh air to everyone around them. Like, you need something done, it's done. And they'll tend to, often with the 3420 as well, they'll tend to kind of work around bullies and stand up to them a bit. And so that's that, these amazing powerhouses of energy that have a really powerful message very often. The Andrew Hubermans of the world, the Robert Greens, the Charles Bukowski even. They're providing value, and they can negotiate with you and talk to you about it. And that's where I'll leave that. Anyway, thank you for listening.